Hello, my name's Connor. I'd been teetering on the brink and contemplating ending my marriage well before the final collapse occurred. For months, I'd been existing in a relationship that resembled a gradual decline rather than a partnership. However, the moment of clarity came during our Memorial Day cookout, when I became the target of mockery. Later that evening, once all the guests had departed and silence filled our home, I vanished without a trace. My wife, Rachel, and I had been husband and wife for nearly 9 years. Initially, we resembled any typical couple, yet we shared an extraordinary bond. We harbored aspirations. Our desire wasn't merely for a structure with 4 walls. We envisioned creating a genuine sanctuary. That represented the vision we'd committed to pursuing. For several years, we worked toward that goal as partners. However, around our 6th anniversary, circumstances began to deteriorate. The change wasn't instantaneous, which made recognition more challenging. The critical juncture arrived when we began attempting to conceive. The desire for children consumed us both completely. Yet as months transformed into years without results, we sought assistance from specialists, scheduled countless appointments, endured procedures, examinations, and rigid timing requirements. We followed every recommendation the medical professionals provided. Each monthly cycle brought renewed optimism, yet each conclusion delivered crushing defeat that permeated our home like toxic fumes. I witnessed the transformation occurring within Rachel. She became increasingly withdrawn and silent. Initially, I attributed this to pressure from our situation. We both experienced profound pain. However, at some point, she abandoned all efforts entirely, not solely regarding the fertility treatments, but concerning our relationship as well. She relinquished our shared dream. I believe when maintaining hope became unbearably painful, she completely released her grip on it. Simultaneously, it seemed she also released her hold on our marriage. The tenderness that once flowed naturally disappeared, replaced by a frigid, courteous separation. We continued occupying the same residence, sharing the same mattress, dining at the same surface, yet I felt as though I cohabitated with a complete stranger, and the wordless void between us intensified daily. The most agonizing aspect was her apparent obliviousness or indifference to our situation. She had become emotionally unavailable. I convinced myself that genuine love required persistence, even when your partner had surrendered. Therefore, roughly 18 months before our relationship completely crumbled, Rachel's brother appeared at our doorstep. He'd recently experienced a catastrophic breakup with his longtime girlfriend. I'm describing explosive confrontations, infidelity accusations, and law enforcement interventions at their residence multiple times. The situation was chaotic, and naturally, he required refuge. Rachel approached me requesting permission for her brother to stay temporarily, merely until he could stabilize his circumstances. Naturally, I agreed. It seemed like the appropriate response. He'd recently lost his living situation and needed family support. He arrived carrying several suitcases and what appeared to be temporary arrangements, yet those few days rapidly extended. I assumed he might require additional time to organize his next steps. However, those days evolved into several weeks. He avoided discussing employment opportunities, securing independent housing, or returning to his previous city. His possessions began overwhelming our spare bedroom. His gaming equipment monopolized our living room. His groceries crowded our refrigerator. Nevertheless, I remained silent. Yet those weeks transformed into a month, then another. Suddenly, we'd entered the 4th month, and he remained in our house. I housed an additional adult male beneath my roof, yet nobody except myself seemed to consider this problematic. My brother-in-law was obnoxious and confrontational, perpetually offering cynical commentary about everything, while the atmosphere became unbearably strained. No boundaries existed, no consideration for personal space, no semblance of order. The experience resembled residing within a fraternity house managed by an irresponsible teenager. Each day brought fresh conflict. I'd return from my job completely drained, hoping for minimal tranquility, only to encounter some new controversy. Disputes became our standard interaction. Meaningful dialogue had vanished, replaced entirely by confrontation. Most painfully, Rachel consistently supported her brother's position, without exception. Regardless of his behavior, Rachel would devise justifications for his actions. I'd express my concerns diplomatically, yet she'd dismiss them immediately. She'd manufacture excuses such as, "He's my only sibling," or "You can't reasonably expect me to evict him simply because you disapprove of something he's done." According to Rachel, my irritation held no legitimacy. One particular incident remains vivid in my memory. Her brother was ridiculing me and making disparaging remarks. Rather than intervening, Rachel joined the mockery with a condescending grin, stating, "Please, stop it. He's overly emotional." They both erupted in laughter. I felt completely degraded. The situation deteriorated to where I couldn't even rest in my own bedroom. Rachel would allow her brother to occupy our master bedroom, forcing me to locate alternative sleeping arrangements wherever possible. I understand some individuals might question, "Why didn't you simply depart?" Believe me, I questioned this myself repeatedly. Yet the situation wasn't straightforward. You see, I believed Rachel's behavior stemmed largely from anguish regarding our inability to conceive. This devastated her completely. I maintained hope that if we could navigate through this challenge and discover a path forward together, then our former love might return. Consequently, I remained far longer than advisable, believing our marriage retained potential for recovery. Yet internally, I was beginning to acknowledge my exhaustion. Eventually, I reached the realization that love alone couldn't anchor me in a residence where I felt like an intruder. Therefore, I arranged a discreet meeting with a family law attorney. I presented all the relevant information. Weeks following that consultation, the dissolution documents were prepared and finalized. However, I couldn't compel myself to file them. Not because I expected her transformation, but because some fragment of me still desired her to regard me as she once had, perhaps just one final time. Still, during my hesitation, the household tension remained unchanged. I compiled a mental checklist and began completing tasks systematically. My initial action involved discreetly gathering essential belongings, clothing, important paperwork, meaningful keepsakes, and placing them in unmarked cardboard containers. I provided ambiguous labels in case anyone discovered them. Subsequently, I secured a small storage facility on the outskirts of town, paying entirely in cash. It was the type of location nobody would consider searching. I gradually transported the containers there, carrying only a few during each trip. I established a new financial account under a modified version of my name. I purchased a secondary cellular device. I even selected a different city, somewhere more compact and peaceful. I organized every detail meticulously. Should my marriage terminate, I was prepared to disappear completely. Yet I hesitated to execute this plan because despite everything, I still harbored love for her. Somewhere beneath all the pain and fatigue, I continued clinging to the woman I'd married. One Sunday afternoon, I departed to decompress for several hours. Upon returning to my driveway, I noticed significantly more vehicles than usual parked along our street. Cheerful voices drifted from our backyard. I could detect children's excited shouts and activity before reaching our front entrance. I entered and followed the commotion. Our backyard was bustling with energy. Children raced around clutching red, white, and blue popsicles. Someone was grilling hamburgers on our barbecue. Patriotic music played softly in the background. Everyone appeared engaged in animated discussions or sharing amusing stories. Beverages occupied our patio table, disposable plates piled with food. The complete celebration. It was an elaborate Memorial Day cookout. The singular issue, I knew absolutely nothing about this gathering. I hesitated at the doorway, absorbing the scene momentarily. It resembled entering a stranger's celebration in your own backyard. I maintained a neutral expression. I located Rachel conversing with her parents near our outdoor dining set. Before I could speak, one of Rachel's cousins spotted me and gestured in my direction. "Connor, come help me with this real quick," she requested. I nodded and crossed the yard. I'd never experienced conflicts with the extended family members. Honestly, I typically enjoyed better relationships with some of them than with Rachel recently. Therefore, I forced a smile and offered assistance. As I provided the requested help, another relative approached with an inquisitive expression, asking, "Hey, where have you been all afternoon? We've been celebrating for hours. Weren't you aware we were coming?" Suddenly, everything became clear. I'd been deliberately excluded. I barely began responding when my brother-in-law interrupted the conversation, his voice carrying clearly as he announced, "You know, if Connor vanished tomorrow, I honestly don't think anybody would even miss him." The entire gathering exploded with laughter. Additionally, Rachel contributed, "I hadn't even realized you weren't here. This was supposedly humorous, certainly, but not from my perspective." Therefore, I lifted my burger as though proposing a toast, displayed a slight smile, and declared, "Challenge accepted." Silence followed my statement. Several people stared at me, probably assuming I was also joking, yet I wasn't. That moment crystallized my decision. I was finished being overlooked in my own existence. By the time the cookout concluded and most guests had departed, our house still hummed with residual energy. This was the evening I'd already been considering abandoning my marriage. Given what had been said to me today, I refused to delay while circumstances worsened further. I didn't require much, merely the essentials: a few clothing items, my computer, crucial documents, and cash in a travel bag. Before exiting, I positioned a copy of the signed dissolution papers directly in the center of our kitchen island, where she couldn't avoid noticing them the following morning, with a yellow adhesive note attached prominently. It read, "Notice anything?" Subsequently, I exited, secured the door, entered my vehicle, and departed. That identical evening, I eliminated every social media profile associated with my identity. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, completely gone. Next, I retrieved my backup prepaid phone, replaced the SIM card, and discarded the original in a storm drain at a gas station 3 counties away. I didn't want discovery. Not by her. Not by anyone. I simply couldn't continue inflicting pain upon myself by remaining. I traveled to a small lakeside cottage I'd previously seen advertised on an obscure rental website, owned by a retired veteran who didn't ask excessive questions. I paid 3 months in advance using cash. It was sufficiently remote to feel forgotten by civilization, yet close enough to a small town where I could purchase necessities when required. I sustained myself through minor freelance consulting projects online. The income barely covered food, utilities, and the few basic requirements I permitted myself. Days merged seamlessly. No schedule existed, no obligations. I'd awaken to the sound of loons calling across the water. Weeks became months. My facial hair grew lengthy. I began consuming healthier meals, resting more soundly, and thinking with unprecedented clarity. Never once did I investigate Rachel's situation, because I finally understood such behavior was unnecessary. That life chapter had concluded. Nothing positive results from reopening old wounds simply to determine whether they continue bleeding. 10 months after my departure, I decided to access one of my abandoned email accounts while searching for some professional files I'd archived previously. It was an account I hadn't accessed since before leaving. I anticipated finding nothing significant. Upon opening the inbox, I became motionless. Dozens of messages existed, all from Rachel. Initially, I felt uncertain about my response. Part of me avoided reading them. I hesitated over the deletion option repeatedly, yet eventually, I opened them. The earliest messages contained fury. She demanded information about my location. She labeled me selfish, cowardly, and cruel. She claimed I was deserting her, that I lacked any right to simply vanish. She threatened to locate me and pursue legal action. Her language was harsh, yet as I reviewed the messages chronologically, her tone shifted. Her words became gentler. Questions remained, yet they no longer contained anger. They seemed uncertain, tentative, as though she was finally hearing her own voice within the silence I'd created. The most recent messages affected me differently. I recall focusing on one specifically. She mentioned the mortgage company had begun sending notices regarding missed payments, suggesting foreclosure was possible. She acknowledged working multiple jobs, struggling to maintain our home financially. She wrote that she'd asked her brother to leave. He wasn't contributing anything, she noted, as though she finally comprehended what I'd been attempting to explain. One message stated, "I understand now. I comprehend why you seemed so withdrawn. I simply wish I hadn't been so oblivious. Another read. I want you to return home. Not because I require assistance, but because I miss your presence. Because I finally recognize what you sacrificed while trying to maintain everything. Then came the message that devastated me. She wrote, I was foolish. I took your presence for granted. I assumed you'd always remain regardless of how much I neglected you. I haven't finalized the divorce papers. I keep hoping someday you'll return. I remained staring at that screen. I won't deceive you. I experienced something. My chest constricted reading those words. I recognized that aspect of her. The side capable of profound love. The side that once wanted to build something meaningful with me. Perhaps this was that version of her finally emerging through all the confusion. Yet emotions aren't always sufficient. For years, I remained in our house convincing myself that love would resolve everything, that time would provide healing. However, even reading those messages, emotional as they were, I couldn't determine whether I could ever return to that existence. At this point, exactly 12 months had passed since my disappearance, a complete year of living entirely disconnected, severing all ties, and breathing freely for the first time in years. I visited town only once bi-weekly for supplies. That particular day, I stopped at a small diner I'd grown fond of. It was located on the edge of downtown. I entered, ordered my regular meal, and waited at the counter when I heard someone speak my name. Initially, I ignored it, yet the second time it came, more insistent and surprised, I turned around. It was Mike, a former colleague. His eyes expanded as though he'd encountered a ghost, which in some sense he had. We engaged in uncomfortable conversation. I kept responses brief, revealing little information. Less than a week later, someone knocked on my cabin door. I wasn't expecting visitors, so I observed through the window, and there she stood, Rachel. For a moment, I remained still. I opened the door gradually, maintaining an expressionless demeanor. "What do you need?" I inquired. She remained speechless as she began crying uncontrollably. She repeatedly apologized, claiming she hadn't realized how severe our situation had become. She wished she'd been more attentive and understood sooner. I didn't interrupt her. I allowed her to continue speaking. When she finished, I stepped outside with her, made direct eye contact and said, "I'll return, but only to conclude this properly. I'll sign whatever requires signing. We'll handle this like mature adults. However, I cannot resume being your husband. Not after everything that occurred. Not after your brother's treatment of me. Not after you witnessed everything and did nothing." She didn't protest. No fight remained within her, simply a gradual nod. She dried her face, attempted smiling, but couldn't manage it. With that, she departed. After reflection on everything, it's remarkable how people only recognize the value of something or someone after it's permanently gone. That represents one of life's most difficult lessons. Unfortunately, it's a lesson I both taught and experienced personally. For years, I remained in a marriage that was obviously disintegrating. Yet nobody explains that love cannot survive when one person makes all the effort, while the other has emotionally withdrawn. I tolerated constant disrespect, humiliation, and chaos created by my brother-in-law because I loved Rachel. I became invisible within my own home. Yet the remarkable thing is, everything only became clear to her after I disappeared. That's when she finally understood what I'd been attempting to communicate all along. Perhaps that's what certain people require, the complete absence of what they always assumed would remain permanently. So if you're experiencing this and feel your presence is being taken for granted, I hope my story provides food for thought. Don't wait until you're completely broken, merely to prove you once had value. And if you're someone who's been pushing someone away, ask yourself why their absence is required for you to finally recognize their worth. I'd genuinely appreciate hearing your thoughts about this situation. Leave a comment below. Share your own experiences. If you've encountered something similar, or even if you haven't, tell me your perspective. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing this type of story today, please share it with them. You never know who's sitting quietly with their escape already planned, just waiting for one more reason to disappear permanently. Thanks for listening.